Hi everyone, Aaron Wyatt again, just to take you through some of the steps you might go through to set up JackTrip yourself if you want to play around with it. Now, there's a few ways to do it, and some of them are easier than others, but some of them are a bit more commercial than others. So, as I was mentioning in the previous videos, it started off as a research project, but it's since started to be commercialized a bit. You can still get the free research versions, which also now have the graphical user interface that I designed for it. So you don't have to fear that if you go for the research route, you'll have command lines to deal with. Or alternatively, you can go with the commercial version. It's a bit flashier, it's slightly better packaged, but of course the problem with it is that you have to pay to use their servers. So if you just want to be able to mess around with some of your friends trying to play audio online between two different locations, it'll be easier, but there might be a little bit of an investment of money there. Alternatively, the research version, investment of time, so it's kind of choose your poison. So if you go to jacktrip.com, you'll be able to find the free download of the commercial version. And it already says it's downloading already. That was very quick. Okay, cancel. I don't need to download it on my machine. You'll just be able to run the installer and get that happening. Alternatively, if you go to my site, I have my versions of the builds of the JackTrip project, and you'll be able to download it from there. There's instructions for both Mac and Windows. If you go down to the instructions section here, you'll see all the packages listed together that you need to install to get things running. So you can run it these days without the Jack server, but I would strongly recommend that you use it because it just gives you a bit more flexibility in terms of routing audio later down the line when you start becoming more accustomed to the program and feel more comfortable playing around with it. So worth just downloading all those packages listed there. Unless you're very nerdy and have Linux, you can skip this very cryptic looking Linux bit. You won't have to worry about that. And then down to this part on setting up JackTrip, and there's some convenient pictures that you can follow along with there. If I just show you how it would look on my computer, assuming that I've downloaded it and gone through all the installers. On Mac, you'll have had to have copied this program, QJack Control, over to your applications folder, but you can just run that, hit setup, and there's really not much to change here. Sample rate, usually 48,000 is a good sample rate to choose. Frames per period, the lower this is, the less latency there is, the less buffering there is. 128 is a good starting point. If you find that your hardware is struggling with that and you're getting a few sort of errors, which we'll see in a second, then you can set it higher. But 128 is probably a good compromise between processing power and latency. Interface, I've changed my settings, so don't follow this, but usually it'll be set on default here. Generally, that's where you want to leave it. If you look at some of these devices that appear, you'll see that there's a built-in microphone device and built-in speaker device, at least on Mac. All of the devices are sort of one-directional devices. So if you choose one of them, then you'll only have input or you'll only have output. The easiest thing to do here is leave this on default, except that I'm going to change it back to my usual one here, because I've got this special aggregate device set up. And then under System Preferences, choose the input and output that you want to use for your sound card here. As long as you have it selected on that at the time that you hit start, as we're about to in a second, it'll use those devices. So if I just quit out of that and hit start here, usually it'll ask you if it can access the microphone and you want to say yes, and that's Jack running. That's all the setup you need to do there. Next step is then running JackTrip. So this is where the commercial offering kind of has the advantage because you can just choose a server that's already running. If you're trying to do this with a friend at home, one of you will need to be the client and one of you will need to be the server. And there's a bit of messing around with router settings that are a little bit beyond the scope of this video. But there are public servers that you can access as well. To connect to a server, you just need to have a hub client set, enter the address of the server, and then if you need a username and password, you can enter that here. There's a lot of advanced options, but to just get connected, you generally don't need to worry about any of these. All of the options that are there are set to be, sane defaults that you can get away with using, and you only really need to tweak if you're really having difficulty with your internet connection. But that's pretty much all you need to do. If you want to connect directly with a friend, as I was saying, you'll need to make sure that there are certain ports in your router that are getting forwarded. That's a bit beyond the scope of this video, but one side will need to be a P2P client and the other side will need to be a P2P server. And then you should be able to connect to one another, and you can use this address here that's being picked up as the external address. As I was saying, look up port forwarding, and it's UDP port 4464, 4464. Won't mean much at the moment until you look through how that networking stuff works, but it's a way to get started. And if you have a friend who is an IT person and who can guide you in that process, then that'll get you on track. Once it's set up in the router, it's set up, you don't need to change it at all. So port forwarding 4464, I think I've even got that on the website, the details there somewhere. Let me just double check that. Yes, I do. Awesome. So show it to a technically minded friend and they'll be able to help you out with that if you're having trouble. Alternatively, if you feel like you know your way around your router and your equipment, which you may do if you know a bit about networking, then you can have a play at trying your hand at sorting that out yourself. But all the information that you need to know is available here on this site. And as I was saying, if you have anyone who's technically minded, they'll be able to assist you on the networking front. Beyond that, you can use your built-in sound card and microphone. They work perfectly well. I've got a little USB interface here, which I've got plugged in and would be using instead, and I would just send my viola signal straight down the line there. Alternatively, if I was playing a different sort of music, I might have an overhead mic just for better sound, but it certainly can work with your built-in microphone and speakers. On that note, it's not Zoom. There's no processing the audio, there's no echo cancellation, noise cancellation, or anything like that, which means that if you do use the built-in sound card, make sure you've got headphones. Don't use the speakers, because otherwise you will create one hell of a feedback loop and you'll potentially damage your speakers and or ears. So always make sure you're wearing headphones and that you're not going to set up a feedback loop. All the sort of standard things that apply when you're dealing with a microphone and a speaker in the same room apply when you're using JackTrip on that front. Hopefully that's enough to at least give you some idea of what you're doing there. And it's a little introduction so you can potentially go away and contemplate playing around with it. Thanks everyone.